Hey everybody, welcome back to the Keep It Simple podcast. After taking a 2-week hiatus for Holy Week and Easter services, we are back in our groove, and today so excited. We are hosting the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Bryan Landreth. I'm sure that many of you, when you saw his name pop up kind of in the ad or the little teaser reel or whatever, you thought, oh my gosh, Bryan's still alive. But I have thought for the past probably 2 hours of how to best introduce Bryan. And the truth of the matter is I don't have words to articulate and completely encapsulate Bryan. You will hear as we visit so much of Bryan's heart and just kind of who he is. We have known each other since Bryan was a very young middle schooler. And so I have been able to journey alongside him and watch him grow and mature into just a solid oak of a man. He is a husband and a father. He's an incredible son and brother, a very, very faithful friend, and a sincere Christian. As you're going to hear in his story, he's just made a career change, and so now he is up to fighting wildfires and doing controlled burns. But for much of his adult life, he served our country in the Coast Guard. I tell people all the time, he is the real life Forrest Gump. So with that, Bryan, welcome to the podcast. You are episode 26. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I guess we just kind of start at the beginning, right? So 2010, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right.
2010, winter time. I end up chaperoning a ski trip for Charlie Judd. See, Judd, we got to have Charlie on, man. Maybe we should do an episode where you and Charlie are both on at the same time. That would be fun. But so the way that I remember it, there was a ski trip planned. Male chaperone backed out like 2 days before. Charlie sticks his head in my office. I'm not doing youth work. I was doing administrative work. Asks if I can go. So we clear it with Jimmy Asbel. And the next thing I know, I think back then we were leaving Warner Robins at like midnight, I think. And so we're on the bus, headed to West Virginia. It's relatively quiet. And I'm just about to drift off to sleep, and I hear somebody meow like a cat. And I'm like, what in the world? I have no experience with student ministry. At the time, I was still rodeoing pretty hard. And so I'm like, I don't know, maybe whatever. So I'm about to doze off asleep again, and I hear meow. And I'm like, okay, so there's a kid somewhere on this bus meowing. And so the way the story goes, a few more minutes goes by, another meow. The meows intensify in frequency and in audible like levels. They get louder and louder. And I'm looking at Charlie. Charlie is straight snoozing, like out. Nobody else seems bothered that there's a kid on this bus meowing. This goes on for a long time, like an hour.
They were used to it at that point.
And so I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. I get up. It's 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I walk down the aisle of the bus, and there you are.
There I am.
Like in this little creature ball. And I walk up and I look at you, and I'm like,
oh, gosh.
What are you doing? And you look up at me. You had the fro then. You remember the fro?
Oh, I remember.
You look up at me, and you were like, I'm like, what, kid, what are you doing? And you go, meow.
That's a rough first impression.
I threaten you with your life, basically tell you I'm going to beat the brakes off of you if you don't shut up. I go back to the front of the bus. I sit down. About 3 minutes pass.
That only stokes the fire.
And I hear, meow. That was the first impression. That's my very first memory of you. Somewhere in that trip we stopped. You bought a snow globe, I guess, at a truck stop.
Yeah, it was like a bouncy ball that had glitter all in it.
And so snowers became a thing. So anybody, all of our people, like the old guard, the OGs from the way back, all of them right now are like, oh yeah. So then snowers becomes a thing, and just randomly you would scream. You're such a weird kid, dude. You would scream snowers, and the bus would just fall apart. Everybody would erupt in laughter. It was a whole vibe. I mean, you had them in the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, whatever it was. You had them like eating out of your hand, and it was as if everybody was in on the gag except for me, which only made it better, right?
Yeah.
So little did we know that. So chaperoning that trip, Charlie put me in a room in a condo with Lyndon, Les, Josh, and Trevor.
Sounds about right.
And Michael Meeks. And he took you guys. He got all the cool
he was merciful.
Yes. So anyway, we get back from that trip, and as the spring unfolded into summer, Charlie applied for some like really, really top shelf music worship school or something in Colorado Springs. Never thought that he would get accepted because it had like a 36-month wait list. Bam, he gets accepted, and the next thing we know, he's moving. And in that time frame, the Lord begins to tell me, like, I was out on runs. I would run every night. I would run 4.2 miles, and the Holy Spirit began to tell me, like, you're going to come out of rodeo and go into student ministry. And I was like,
not with that kid.
Not with the snowers kid meowing at me, you know. And so sure enough, we get to the fall, man, and everything, the fall of that year, and everything unfolds, and the next thing I know, I'm headlong in student ministry. And you were pissed. So you deeply love Charlie Judd.
Yeah, I was not happy.
No, and what I remember very clearly is like incrementally, one by one, I began to kind of win people over, and they gave me a chance. But you were like the last of the Mohicans. You were like the one in the corner with your arms folded, and you were like, Charlie's my guy. So spiritually, I guess Charlie is a great place to start. So as a middle school kid, right? Certainly eccentric, a different little middle school kid. What kind of impact did Charlie Judd have on you? It must have been profound, man, because you loved that dude deeply. Still do, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I definitely thought that this might come up in conversation. I didn't think it was going to be right out of the gates that we were talking about snowers, but I mean, I remember at that time, up until that point, I guess I don't know how else to put this. I didn't really have much going for me, I think, at that point. I wasn't particularly like the top student in the class. I wasn't very athletic. I had a hard time kind of getting in touch with people. And so I found out that if I annoy people, I could get the attention that I wanted. And so and it worked. And so I just leaned really hard into that for those couple years. And
Yeah.
Charlie was, I think he was the only one that allowed me, that didn't seem to get instantly angry when I was doing that. He would essentially humor me. And I think I just really, really connected to that. And yeah, so he just kind of allowed me the space to be me, no matter how annoying it was. And I think I really just connected to that.
Yeah. And Charlie, in and of himself, he told me one time we were talking, I don't remember when it was, but he was like, oh, I know what it was. It was in the going away thing when we moved away from First and moved out to the Midwest. He recorded a thing. Some folks put together a montage of people saying, thanks so much or whatever. But in Charlie's part, he was like, you're the first person that ever told me I was weird. And thank you so much for telling me that, because it gave me permission, like, to be myself, to be weird. And the only reason I bring that up is I would bet, I don't know, we'll talk about this, I guess, if he comes on, when he comes on, I would bet he saw some of that in you and saw some of himself in you, which is compassion, right? Compassion takes place when we see bits and pieces of ourselves in others. So I would bet that 20-something-year-old Charlie saw bits and pieces of 12-year-old Charlie in 12-year-old Bryan, if I had to bet. So, yeah, those first couple years were rough, but, dude, it's interesting, I guess, because I was the director or whatever. I got a lot of the accolades or praise or credit, but our student ministry was what it was. So when I step back now, hindsight, looking back 30,000 feet view, our student ministry became what it was because in each of those kind of generations, we had at least one incredible leader, like a person that was completely sold out to what we were doing. And from the beginning, like at the beginning, those first couple years, that was Connor, and then eventually Mindy. But then that baton was passed to you. And by the time that Connor and that bunch graduated out, you had matured to this level where you were like all in.
Right.
And you've got the gift of evangelism, right? So you're an evangelist. And that doesn't mean having to fill a stadium and like hold these rallies, but every week from the time you hit high school, every week, specifically on Wednesdays that would carry over to Sundays, every week you were bringing 3 and 4 and 5 fresh faces, new people to church every week.
Right.
Like, how were you doing that? What were you doing that you were drawing that amount of people to come to church?
I think the first and foremost is that I was completely comfortable at church. I had been raised at First United Methodist, and so I felt at home. And my mom also worked there, so it kind of gave me not like a pass, but I knew the people, I knew the halls, like I knew a lot about the church, and it started off really slow. I remember I would just invite kind of my closest friends, Kayla, Ferry, Jordan, and Justin, and that small group that we had. And I would invite them first, and once I kind of got them. Then it was just, I was also at home and now I'm hanging with my friends. And so I would walk from Northside High School to First United Methodist. And it got to the point where even if I saw somebody I recognized, I may not have known them, but because I was comfortable with the church and I had a group of friends, I just felt kind of like a strong foundation essentially. And so I would just see somebody that I recognized and say, hey, we're walking to church. You want to come with us? And they would, they'd see a big group of people. They're like, sure, where's this group going? And so they would get curious and just kind of follow us. And, and it was so much fun because we'd kind of pave our own path to first. We wouldn't take the roads necessarily. We'd go into like the sewer ditches and we'd, crawl through all the trees and stuff. And it was a fun time. I don't know if my parents really ever knew that I was doing that, but we would just kind of track through the woods and it was just, we'd make our own path. And so it was just kind of the whole journey itself to get to the church was also a blast.
That's so awesome, man.
It was just kind of a snowball effect where I got my closest friends and then I'd get my classmates and then just people that I recognized. And it was just kind of a snowball.
Yeah. And that, so somewhere in there, like maybe your sophomore year, I don't think it was junior year yet, but I mean, you were bringing masses of people to church.
Right.
And I started to get in trouble because a lot of times you were bringing them on Wednesdays, right? Because you had school. Sundays you didn't have school. And so the people who were preparing Wednesday night supper, we were running out of food. I don't know if you ever knew this, but the kitchen was running out of food because we were feeding people that we hadn't planned on. And so none of the people who planned the meals or bought the food or did any of that, none of those people ever came to me. But some of the people kind of in administration and the business side of things came to me and they were like, you got to do something about these kids. We're running out of food. We don't have blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. It doesn't matter to me. We will not tell our students, don't bring friends to church because we didn't plan to feed them. And so the one thing that I love so much about that season, and especially with our local church, is we had people in the church who began to donate money to pay for students that we didn't know were coming. Yeah. And then we had cooks and everybody involved stretch themselves to begin to plan and kind of project how many. I don't know if you knew any of that was going on, but behind the scenes, like there was this whole web of people who were like, at first they came and they were like, we got to do something about this. And I was like, Right. And then everybody dove in and was like, okay, how do we feed them? And the one thing about that season with you that sticks, this is quintessential high school Bryan Landreth. So I came to you like your junior year, sophomore year, junior year, and I was like, because this wasn't like a 2 or 3 or 6 month sample size. This was years by this point. Yeah. And so I'm like, how are you doing this? I don't know if you remember this, but I came to you and I'm like, hey, dude, how are you doing this? And you're like, oh, it's easy. I walk past the bus stop, like where all the kids are lined up to get on buses, or I walk past the car rider line where they're waiting for their parents, and I just scream at the top of my lungs, hey, if you want a free meal, come with me. And then I just start walking, and in my mind, I get this image of like the Pied Piper, like, you know what I mean? And like this mob of people, and it grew to the point to where that is very much what our Wednesday nights looked like. And the thing that was super incredible was most all, we saw them again Sunday night. They would come Wednesday. Yeah. And we had FaceTime. We had that chance with them. And then they realized we're just normal people. And they would come back Sunday. And if I were to sit down and make a list, those years that we were running those, I mean, we had to knock out walls and, they gave up the clothes closet then for us to make a worship space. All of that came from that season of you being intentional to invite. Right. If I had to sit down and make a list of the people who were exposed to the gospel of Jesus in your 4 years in high school, it would be a very, very very long list
Right.
of people. So incredible, man. I'm so thankful that I didn't choke you to death when you were in the 7th grade or 8th grade.
You had plenty of opportunities to do that. But I do want to go back. You were saying like that the church, they made a lot of sacrifices, a lot of the behind the scenes, and I know a lot of times it may feel like they weren't seen, and maybe it's because my mom did work at the church, and I don't think she ever told me, but maybe just me overhearing, but even just watching, because I knew the congregation so well, that I did see the work and kind of the sacrifice that was made when all these kids were coming in and getting those meals. And I think that really affected my faith life, because a lot of people go to church and they'll wear like a Sunday mask, and but you can tell that this congregation at First United Methodist took it serious. Like when kids were coming in, there was no questions asked. They just served the kids, and I saw that, and maybe I never articulated it, but it really, I was like, okay, this is real. Like, people actually do care about this stuff. And I think that's what gave me, I don't know if you remember, before I went to boot camp, I stood up before the church and kind of gave a going away little speech thing.
Yes.
And it's only because I meant every word. That congregation really, I saw the works of Jesus in that congregation, just how much that they gave when it did get tough. They didn't say, hey, stop this. They pushed through and really, shared gospels with these kids.
Yeah. And there were some, like, I think about Merwin. I think about that guy a lot.
Yeah.
And he would disappear, and I couldn't find him.
Yep.
And homeboy would be like asleep under the chairs, like planked out under the chairs in the black room, asleep.
Yep.
And I remember people like, aren't you going to wake him up? And I'm like, no. If you can't sleep soundly in the presence of God, like, I don't know his home life. I have no idea his culture. If the presence of God is some of the best sleep that you ever get in your life,
Absolutely.
But that, those years, I did not realize, it's, when you're in the midst of things, you don't realize how special a season is, right? Most of the time it's in hindsight. But those years with your mom, so your mom, Tracy, I use her, I talk about Tracy here very, very regular.
Yeah.
She's like the sister I never had, and but then, so not to jump too far ahead, but I made mention, like, there was a kind of, in each generation there was that leader, there were those leaders, and so it was Connor and Mindy, and then it came to you, but like when you were leading, so like when Connor and Mindy were leading, Caroline Freeman was watching. Mindy had such an impact on Caroline Freeman. When you were leading, Stephen was watching. I mean, he didn't miss any of it. And when Caroline was leading, Allison was watching. And so all these years later, looking back, and I think about the way that community worked, the way that the Holy Spirit worked, the way that God worked in those years, those were top shelf years. But it was like Connor and Mindy, and then you. And then Caroline, and then Stephen. And then Allison. So in those years, over a decade, there was never one time that we didn't have at least one super, super solid leader in place. And it was all because you guys had modeled that for the younger generations. And so you set that expectation for the entire program. So I've never told you thank you, but thank you.
Yeah.
I mean that. Thank you. Oftentimes, I was the one that got the accolades or the pat on the back, but literally, I was just trying to control the chaos. I was trying to keep you all, on the paved road and out of the ditches. But you all were doing, you all were doing the ministry. So thank you for that, man.
Thank you.
And the amount of lives touched in and through your faithfulness. So first, obviously, super special place. Certainly feels like home to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to jump too far ahead back to you being in Middle Georgia. So then in your story, so you graduate high school.
Right.
In high school, you were ROTC?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's really, you're talking about how annoying I was in middle school. And it's true. I was really annoying. But in high school, I think I really found kind of my niche. Like I knew once I joined ROTC, I was good at something. And I remember you teaching, and I still think about this today, is hurt people, and healthy people help people. And I think JROTC was really where I kind of gained self-confidence, whereas before I was not comfortable with who I was or where I was at spiritually, like physically, mentally. I wasn't comfortable. And so when I joined JROTC, I was like, hey, like I'm good at this, and people like me for whatever reason. And so that JROTC, even though it may not have affected my spiritual life directly, I think it gave me the self-confidence that I needed to invite people to just be comfortable with who I was, to go up and ask them like, hey, come to church with me, you know?
And that authenticity is magnetic. Like you were the guy. I mean, that whether it be in a school setting or a social setting, I mean, I was able to observe you in a lot of settings, on campus, off campus, in a lot of different places, growing into that kind of comfort in who you are and how God made you, and being given permission to live from that place. You really did come alive in those years. And it's funny, you know, at the beginning of this, when you said, you know, I wasn't athletic, I wasn't that. By your junior and senior year, you were extremely athletic. I mean, you were a late bloomer, but once you bloomed, you shot up in size, you put on muscle tone, you know, you were doing PT and stuff anyway, but then became extremely athletic. And so it's just interesting how physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all these alleles kind of funnel in to this wholeness. So in ROTC in high school, you're going to have to help me because I'm terrible with like the proper. So is it color guard or honor guard? When you
color
were
guard,
spinning the thing,
that was the drill team. So I did the drill team.
Okay.
I forgot what we called it, D-mill, I think, because you had facsimile, they were super light rifles, very fast. And then I had the demilitarized ones, which were a little heavier and kind of was based more on, like, what's the word? When I can do it at the same time as someone else, like
synchronization.
Yeah.
Synchronized. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. If we could all do it together and make a routine look good, that's kind of what it was based off of. And I did not think that was going to take me anywhere. You know, you don't graduate from high school and say, time to go spin some more rifles. Like, that just doesn't... I thought I was done. And then, I don't know if you wanted to jump this far ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, go. Yeah.
When I joined the Coast Guard, in boot camp, they had these guys come in with these fancy uniforms. They had these white belts, very, very poised. And they said, who wants to join the honor guard? And they kind of explained what it was. And they said, you have the drill team where you get to spin rifles. And I was like, sign me up. Like, that's me. I've done that for 4 years. And so that was kind of, I went into the honor guard. And so that's where the difference between color guard and honor guard. The honor guard does like presidential ceremonies and funerals for the president and for fallen military members. But at the same time, I was able to do drill team to kind of help with recruiting efforts. And so I got to spin a rifle for 2.5 more years. And I never thought I was getting paid to do that at that point. And so it's just wild that I never thought that it would carry me into the honor guard.
So
And because I had done it in high school, I was good at it. I immediately jumped to, we called it center four, and it was like the four best spinners essentially. And I immediately, once I got all my qualifications, I jumped right into C4. My first performance was with C4, and I had to learn the routine on the bus trip to the performance. Because one guy, I think he hurt his hand or something. One of the C4 members hurt his hand, and our drill instructor turned to me. He's like, "Can you learn the routine?" And I was like, "I guess I have to." And so my first performance was part of that center four, spinning those rifles.
So that's where. So what I say all the time when I'm talking about you, I talk about you a lot. Always good telling stories and stuff. I love story.
Mm-hmm.
But what I tell people is, like, I know the real life Forrest Gump. But the reason I say that is, so I get a text one day and it's like, "Hey dude, turn the TV on, whatever."
Mm-hmm.
And I turn the TV on and Marine One lands on the White House lawn.
Mm-hmm.
And the President Obama, gets off the airplane or the helicopter and is walking across the lawn of the White House and hits the red carpet, and there's the military people there doing the stuff, and you're there.
Yep.
And I'm like, I'm standing in my den, and I'm like, I know him. I know that guy, you know. And so I tell folks all the time, like, I know the real life Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, so you were at the White House, was that regularly, or like, what?
So, I mean, our goal as the honor guard was to perform ceremonies for the president and any sort of military honors. So we did the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Yes.
Anytime foreign dignitaries came to visit and kind of do a speech at the White House, we were there to kind of show our military presence. And we also did funerals. And the Coast Guard Honor Guard is the only honor guard that would travel to do funerals. All the other branches, you have to be buried in Arlington Memorial Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
The Coast Guard, at least when I was in it, I don't know if they've changed, we were the only ones that would travel to go perform a funeral service for Coast Guardsmen.
Mm.
So it was awesome, and it actually really kind of affected my faith life and how I view kind of rituals. Because up until that point, you know, I really enjoyed the black room. It was kind of relaxed, you know, strumming the guitar. Half the people didn't wear shoes, you know. It was just relaxed, and I think that I really enjoyed that season. But then when I joined the honor guard, and everything we did had a purpose. So we'd salute a certain way, and it meant this, or we'd march differently depending on where we were for this reason. There was always kind of a purpose, and so if you're just looking on, it's kind of weird. You're like, I don't understand why they're doing this or acting this way.
Mm-hmm.
But the honor guard performing it, we had a reason, and it was like to pay respect, to pay honor to a fallen member or the president, or even just kind of the station of the president. And so rituals kind of took on a whole new meaning. And so that for some reason transferred over into my faith life, to where I sought out more ceremonious styles of worship. And so when I was a kid, you know, we grew up at first, and I remember it being a lot more traditional then. You know, we'd sing the hymns, there was bells, people would wear the robes, and growing up as a kid, it was incredibly boring. You know, I think that's a normal reaction.
Yeah.
But being in the honor guard, I wanted to know why we would do this as opposed to this. And so like I said, I began to seek out kind of that style of worship. And so in DC, that's the best place to really kind of seek those experiences out, because all the churches are historic and very old. And there's so many different denominations in DC, and so many different religious kind of organizations up there, that I would spend Saturdays just in DC walking to different churches. One time I went to a Sikh temple, and I just walked in. I found what time that they were doing their service, and I just walked in, had no idea what I was doing, and so I went and would just kind of expose myself to all these different types of worship, and it really, the honor guard just really have changed my outlook on it.
I remember for a while, one of the times you were home and we called up, you were attending a Quaker church.
Yeah.
How was that?
That one was interesting. I think I only went there once or twice, because I didn't have a car. So anytime I went somewhere, I either had to walk or bike, and the Quaker church was kind of a little further away. But that one was interesting. There was no pastor or preacher. You would just sit there in the room, and they kind of had these pews that would all face each other. And you would just, and they called it different. They called it silent worship, or I just believe silent worship. So you'd sit there and you'd either pray or meditate or just open your Bible. And when someone felt led, they'd stand up and just start preaching. And it was really just kind of, I wasn't used to it. So I'm sitting there reading my Bible, and all of a sudden someone jumps up and says, "A message from the Lord." And everyone was like looking up, and I like jumped in my seat, and it was so dead silent.
That's
and then,
awesome.
Yeah, it was a really, really cool experience. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So I got to ask the question. It's kind of like when people find out that I rodeoed, the question that we all roll our eyes at is like, have you been hurt? And what was the worst? Like, what's the worst injury? And people in rodeo, it's just like, don't ask me that. So forgive me ahead of time.
Right.
But so in the honor guard, like, what were some of the coolest ceremonies or some of the places that you found yourself? Was there ever those moments where you're like, I can't believe I'm standing here right now?
I guess one of the coolest is that I like to tell myself I heard Obama's last words as president.
Okay.
Because when that was, let's see, what year was that? I want to say 2016. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but that was when Trump took office, and I did. So that's like the honor guard Super Bowl. Everyone's involved. Everyone's doing something. It's such a big, the transfer of power and everything is just so big and elaborate. So they had me on Obama.
At the actual, not to interrupt you, but like the actual inauguration.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the 2016 inauguration.
Yes.
Okay.
So they had one group that was doing kind of Trump's portion as he was coming into office, and then there was another group that was doing Obama's portion as he was leaving office. So I believe I was at, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, I believe I was at Fort Andrews, and they had kind of a cordon. So they had the plane that was taken off when Obama was leaving, and we were all lined up there, and Obama came up, and I was at the very end. So it's kind of weird to think that I was one of the shorter ones in the honor guard, and they based everything on height. Yep. So sorry to off track. In the honor guard, you have to be at least 6 feet tall in order to join. So no one shorter. They make exemptions sometimes, but they try to aim for 6 feet or taller.
Wow.
And that's so that when you're looking at the platoon, the height is kind of relatively the same. It's flat. If you have people of all different heights, it angles drastically. And so for the honor guard, you have to be, they try to make it tall so that it's just straight across. So, but I was one of the shorter ones, which is kind of weird to think about. I was always looking up to people. But so that put me at the very end of the cordon, which was at the end of the red carpet. And Obama came up and he stood there and he gave Michelle a hug, and then he said, "All right, let's do this," before he walked on the plane. And so that, I was standing there like, I can't believe this is actually happening. Like I got to hear that because he whispered it. It wasn't like he said it out loud. He just whispered it to his wife, and I was like, I can't believe I just heard that.
It's a real live Forrest Gump, man. That's what I tell people. That is so cool. That, you know what? It's no secret. Anybody I've ever been around in my life knows I don't have a political bone in my body. Obama, just as a human being, that sucker's cool.
Yeah.
Like smooth, he was, I enjoy watching his interviews. I don't, politics, whatever, schmeh.
Right.
But he just always came across as like smooth, cool.
Right. Yeah.
Which I appreciated. I like smooth and cool. So, nice, man. So did you, again, legal disclaimer, I don't know exactly what I'm watching. I understand the reverence. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Right.
Were you ever part of that and the wreaths and?
Right. So we would do ceremonies there every so often. If there was a ceremony, we would all the branches would get together and kind of do a laying of the wreath ceremony.
Okay.
But the people that stand guard over it 24/7, 365 days of the year, that's the old guard. That's the army. So the army has kind of that honor of doing that, and they guard it all the time. But we would do ceremonies. We'd march up the stairs next to the tomb, and they would lay the wreaths, and then we'd kind of march down. And that's what I was saying. We would march differently. So you see the normal military march. That one we would kind of almost like tiptoe, and it was a lot quieter, just to kind of pay respects to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Wow. So freaking cool, man. To me, it's cool. To you, it's probably like, I don't know, but to me, it's really, really cool. So, so in those years, where in your story? So you're in DC or in the area, visiting churches. I know you well enough to know most of the time, probably in cut-off khaki shorts or cargo shorts of some degree, a wretched T-shirt, and you're barefoot, maybe flip-flops if we're lucky. And
I bought one pair of sandals my entire Coast Guard career, and I wore them the entire time. They were falling like Megan hates them. They're disgusting. They're just falling apart.
Which is the perfect segue. So somewhere in there you meet Megan.
Yes, yeah.
How in the world? So you got a single guy in the honor guard. You're traveling. You're doing all these things. How did you and Megan come to be?
Well, and if she's listening to this, she's going to kill me because I'm going to mess it all up. I'm just going to explain it wrong.
It's all right. That's what we do.
She worked at a chiropractic center as like the secretary. And in the honor guard, I don't know how true it was, but we would always say that standing there, because we would stand for 2 hours at a time. That was just like, you couldn't move. You had to stay there. And so we always tell ourselves that it was really bad for our backs. So I started going to a chiropractor just to get realigned or whatever. And I walked in and she was at the front desk. And I had no idea who she was, but apparently she already knew who I was because her best friend that worked there, her husband was also in the honor guard.
Oh.
And so she had been talking and kind of shown pictures of everyone. And a lot of people from the honor guard was going to that chiropractor. So it was like she already kind of knew who I was. And then I was church hopping around, and pretty soon after that, I just happened to show up at the church that she was at, and Megan was singing in the service. Wow. And so after that, I awkwardly came up to her and tried to start a conversation. And I want to say we went on a couple like group dates, I guess. I didn't think it was a date, but apparently she was like trying to talk to me, and I was just oblivious, had no idea. And I want to say one of our first dates, I invited her to go to the Cathedral of, what is it called? The Basilica of the Immaculate Conception. It's like the largest Catholic church. It's in DC. And so we just took a metro train into DC, and we walked to this huge basilica, and that was one of our first dates. I just walked up to her. I was like, "Hey, you want to go to DC and look at this really big church that I'm interested in?" And she was like, "Yeah." So, and we just kept hanging out from there.
Wow.
She tells me now that because I didn't have a car, she kept offering me rides to try to hang out more, and she'd get frustrated because she's like, "You need a ride?" And I would be walking miles to get to someplace. I'm like, "No, I'm good. I'll walk there." And she's just getting frustrated.
Yeah.
So
That which was a characteristic of our group. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know, of you, but our group just as a whole, yeah, and never really about the wrapping paper. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, always about the gift inside.
Mm-hmm.
So you all, you meet, you date. There were times where y'all were long distance. Do I remember that right?
Yes. So I'm trying to remember. My dream at that point was to go to the Coast Guard Academy. That was once I found out that I could go from enlisted to the Coast Guard Academy. That was my goal. So I started attending school online, trying to get my SAT score up, trying to get my grades up, doing everything I can, and I wasn't, I was just out of high school. This was my first time away from home. I really wasn't trying to do the whole commitment thing. I'm sure a lot of young guys, go through that phase, and I just really wasn't. And I kind of gave the impression that as soon as, like, if I get hired at the academy, like, that was it. I was going to go and be an officer. And I finally got the acceptance letter, but I had to go through, because I was prior enlisted and I was out of high school for so long, they wanted me to go to a preparatory school, which was in Alabama.
I remember that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so it was just for a year, and it was a conditional appointment. If I could complete my year at that school, I would have a guaranteed spot at the academy. So I accepted, and pretty much I went up to Megan and I was like, I got accepted, and she's like, I'm going with you. Like, I'm moving to Alabama and I want to make this work. And it was at that point that I really had to reflect that how serious she was taking it versus how serious I was. And I really had to kind of examine like what I wanted. And so I was like, yeah, like, I want to make this work. And so I helped her move she was uprooting from family, from where she grew up, to go to Alabama with this guy that she only knew for about a year, I want to say. And so
worked at a library, didn't she? Did she
no,
work? Was she a librarian? Oh, she went back to work at a chiropractic place?
She went back to a chiropractic center there, and then she started kind of working in finance.
Oh. So when your mom told me, your mom came in and she said, Brian's moving to Alabama for like Q school or whatever to get ready to go to the academy. I'm like, cool. And she said, Megan's moving with him. And I'm like, this might be the one. I mean, if she's crazy enough to follow him to Alabama. So you get done with that, then you go to the academy. And there was a time, did your time at the Coast Guard Academy and Steven's time at the Naval Academy overlap? Or
yes,
no?
He was already at the academy, and that was it was kind of cool. He was graduating, if I'm not mistaken, a year before me. So had I stayed, he would have graduated, and then I would have graduated the following year. So my younger brother passed me on that one. He still has. But so he was already at the academy when I went.
I just remember thinking how cool for your parents to have, two sons, one at the Coast Guard Academy and one at the Naval Academy. It's no small feat. To have a kid at either one of those places is no small feat. To have one at both or two at each, huge. So that's a pretty cool segue. We'll break away from you and Megan for a moment and talk about family, right? And so, nobody's perfect. Life is life. Being human is to be broken. But your family, man, if you will, just talk about the importance of your family of origin, your mom, your dad, siblings, and kind of that nucleus,
Sure.
the importance in your life.
Well, I mean, definitely my parents played a huge role. Everyone knows kind of how, just how strong in faith they are. And I really, I think that is one of the biggest factors in my life is that a lot of parents, or a lot of people, I should say, just go to church and they act like church people. And then they
Mm-hmm.
leave church and it's completely different.
Mm-hmm.
My parents weren't like that. What you saw at church was what you got. And the same thing that I said about the whole congregation is that they took it serious.
Mm-hmm.
My parents, my dad read devotionals to us, all of us kids, and my mom would help out at the church all the time, and it was just they took it serious, and
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of cool. It was kind of funny. So my dad grew up Pentecostal, and my mom, I believe she was Baptist, and so it was only kind of a divine intervention that they ended up at a Methodist church.
Yeah, kind
It
of
was,
met in the middle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but but they had an interesting kind of like dichotomy between the two, and a lot of people will take this the wrong way, and I don't mean this, is that I could go to my dad with a certain question about the Bible, and we could talk for hours and get absolutely nowhere, but we would just kind of discuss the different nuances and kind of what that passage entailed, and then I could go to my mom with that same passage and say, why does the Bible say this?
Mm-hmm.
And she would just say, that's what the Bible says. And it's just kind of that too, like I could go to my mom to ask like those, like she wasn't in it for the long theological conversations,
Mm-hmm.
but it was still kind of that firm, strong like faith. Whereas my
Mm-hmm.
dad had that like curious kind of wonder
Mm-hmm.
in his faith, and I think it was both fantastic growing up with that. I had both avenues, Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? Like,
It makes
uh,
perfect sense, and that dichotomy is the perfect combination. And dichotomy is the right word. It's the head and the heart.
hmm
And I didn't realize this till like in real time in this moment. What a gift! Because
hmm
through Terry you had the head, and through Tracy you had the heart.
hmm
Not that the other didn't have
right.
whatever, but I'm saying you had a person that was head driven, so
hmm
freaking smart, so freaking smart.
right.
And then a person that was heart driven.
hmm
What a beautiful gift, man.
right.
To have both of those pouring into you all. No wonder you all turned out the way that you have. Um, as an outsider who eventually became an insider, kind of got grafted in and considered to be part of the family, as an outsider looking in, one of the things that I appreciated most about your family and about your parents is they embraced the eccentric.
Yes. Yeah.
I never heard your mom or dad at any point ever
hmm
with any of you four or any of your circle of friends. And there were some, you got to admit, dude, there were some interesting characters in the circle of
Oh
friends.
yeah. hmm
And your home was come as you are.
hmm
No strings attached, no stipulations. Everybody's welcome.
hmm
In a weird way, that's like the highest compliment that I can
hmm
give. Your dad had an incredible, just a profound impact on me, and there's a lot of things that I think about consistently. But there was only one time we were on a ski trip. We had a kid that was really out of sorts,
hmm
and I got on to him, and Terry was in earshot. And later that night, no audience, nobody around, everybody gone to bed, even the chaperone adults. I mean, we had freaking, I don't even remember, 8 or 10 condos full of human beings.
hmm
And I had gone around to check, make sure everybody was in their rooms like I did. And when I came past Terry's room, he was standing outside. And he was waiting on me. He knew that I would be making my rounds.
Yeah.
And when I came past him, he didn't say it in any kind of way. He took his hand, he put it on my shoulder, and he said, "Ben, I think you were hard on so and so." That's all he said. He didn't say anything more. But that, like the next day, I went to so and so and was like, "Hey, I was too hard on you," like, and we had an incredible conversation. The only time in all the times, because he chaperoned so much, we spent so much time together. The only time he ever offered a word of correction, it wasn't theological, it wasn't anything that I was preaching or teaching. It was in my interaction and my handling with a kid that was out of sorts. I can't tell you how often I think about that, man.
Yeah.
That was Terry, though, right?
Oh yeah. For sure.
Would not do that in an audience. Would just wait, and then it was just you and him. But when he would say things like that, it would like run through you.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we were younger, it definitely didn't feel that way because he would get mad at us all the time. But then again, we deserved it. But as we got older, it was kind of he took off kind of the training wheels, and he let us make our own decisions. And rarely would he ever get mad. He would just kind of try to veer you more so in the right direction, which I think was really powerful.
Yeah, and so you had the head part, and then you had Tracy with the heart piece. I learned early, very early, that I wanted to always make sure that Trace was on my side.
Yep.
Like I learned that quickly. And worked diligently to make sure that we were on the same team. Very seldom did we ever get cross. And if we did, she would come to me and just tell me, I don't appreciate this or I don't like that. And we had the type of relationship where we could talk through those things and move forward. So from that nucleus, then that shaping and forming and molding, and as I watch like you and Jason and Sarah and Stephen, there's so much of them, both Terry and Tracy in y'all. That kind of family first mentality, do you see that trickling out in your own home, like in your marriage? And I know your kiddos are still pretty young, but do you see parts and pieces of your parents coming out in you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to think of any examples, but I just remember community and kind of being family oriented becoming important, particularly when I first joined the military. And I had the privilege of being in the honor guard, which I got to do a lot of cool things that not too many people get to do. But when I was in DC and I was going to these monuments and going to these museums and doing all these cool things, I'd come back home and try to tell everyone, like, hey, this is what I did. It was super cool. And it's just not that same, it's not that same feeling, and it's kind of isolating. So even though I was going out and doing these cool things, I was by myself. And it was just, I remember one time particularly, I was walking around DC, I was looking at the monuments, and I was just like, I'm just alone. There's what's the point of all this? If there's no one next to me to kind of enjoy it or experience it with. And so that's when community and family really started to click. And so, I mean, it was family that drove me to come back to Middle Georgia, particularly after my dad passed. It just became so real that you don't know how much time you're going to have with your parents. And everyone knows that. Everyone has that head knowledge. But it became real. Like, I want to be with family and spend as much time as I can. And I don't need to go to all these extravagant places and see all these cool things. Like, I want to be with family. And so I want my kids to know their grandparents and aunts and uncles and so that kind
cousins,
cousins and so
the idea of your kids and Fonz's kid growing up together,
Mm-hmm.
is incredible.
Mm-hmm. But they're already getting. I mean, growing up, I remember always fighting with my siblings, and I don't know for how long in my childhood that was actually true, but Jason's son and my two kids, they're already like best friends. Like they just love being around each other, and
It's awesome.
it's really good to see.
We need to have Fonz on. We need to have, at some point, we have to have all four on one by one. Sarah might be like pulling teeth, but
Yep.
we need to have Fonz on and talk about the trench coat in the lazy river at Wild Adventures. Yeah, that thought makes me incredibly happy, man. Your kids and his kid growing up
Mm-hmm.
together in close proximity. So that segues perfectly. So kind of full circle, I talk about a lot about cyclical and how life is cyclical. And
Mm-hmm.
the author of Ecclesiastes, most believe is Solomon, wrote about how, there's nothing new under the sun and everything hurries back to repeat itself. So relatively recently, you and Megan and the kids have found yourself back in Middle Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
You were sharing with me before I hit record, so you are out of the military now.
Yep.
What are you up to? What are you doing?
Right. So I got out of the military this past January after 9 years, and wanted the primary reason was for family, but I became a wildland firefighter, and so I'm in training now to kind of get all the qualifications I need for that. So back in Middle Georgia, I'm still commuting between where I'm at to go back to First, and so we spend as much time as we can there and with my mom afterwards. So
What's that been like going back home,
mhm.
worship-wise, church-wise? What's it been like going back home as an adult? Perspective and just to be back in those spaces and places. What has that been like as an adult?
It's very strange. It's because when I left, I was 18. I still considered myself, because like you said, I was kind of a late bloomer. I was pretty immature, um, and so I was still a kid. And being back as an adult, talking to people that I've known my entire life, but now as an adult, it's bizarre. But definitely, kind of the mentality changed. I used when I was going as a teenager and as a child, I was always receiving. Even when I was giving back, and kind of trying to bring people into the church, I was just growing, and so I was taking in as much as I could. But now being back as an adult, it's like it's just a more kind of, let's get our hands dirty, let's get some stuff done, essentially.
Amen,
I want to
man.
give back. Like I've said, the congregation and the church itself has made such an impact on my life that I'm just ready to kind of fight for it and kind of give back. So,
Yeah. Are you volunteering over in the youth space at all?
not so much yet. We've wanted to. It's just, it takes us 40 minutes to drive. And
Oh
so
yeah.
we're trying to figure out, we don't have all the time to be there and be present. So we're trying to kind of feel out where God is really calling us, where he needs us the most. So just trying to kind of get a feel for that, and try essentially, because we are in such a transitionary period. We got a new house, a new job,
Amen,
a new
man.
dog, a new kid, all these things. We're trying to find our rhythm.
A house, a job. If ever there was a Bryan Landreth statement, we got a new house, a new job, a new dog,
and a new kid.
and a new kid.
So just trying to find our rhythm and see kind of like what we're able to do. Megan is helping out with I think she's starting to help out with the youth some, because
Cool.
she can sing and play keyboard, so she's trying to
Cool.
get back musically to the youth.
Are they still in the black room? Is that space
Yeah.
still? Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. We need to get back there sometime when we're home. Just show up, pop in and worship. That'd be sweet.
Yeah.
Speaking of sweet surprises, so last Sunday, Brad and Tracy Wright and Luke and Landon showed up at our place here in Missouri.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Dude, it freaking wrecked me. It's like 10 minutes before the service starts. I'm back in the AV booth talking to people kind of lining out, and I look up and I saw Tracy walk in, and it's like that glitch where like you know a person but this isn't the right context.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I see the boys walk in, and then I see Brad walk in. I got so freaking emotional. Like I literally had to go to my office and sit down and be like, all right, pull this stuff together. So yeah, home, there's no place like home. You can go and you can do and you can Forrest Gump it, but home is home, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's so kind of tying it all together before I haven't forgotten the last question, which I usually do. So what roles from the beginning, from freaking meowing and snowers all the way to real time now, spiritually speaking, what role has community, authentic community, played, like in the different ages and stages and phases, the nuances of your life? What role has community played? It's a big question, I know, but
Yeah, I mean that's a big question. It's hard to think on the spot. I guess I'd have to say kind of accountability. You know, as you go through different phases of life, I think your kind of your role changes. Like I said earlier, when I was a youth, it was to kind of grow and receive, and now it's to kind of give back. So that community aspect kind of reminds me of my role. You know, if I'm an adult, but I'm being immature and I'm trying to just take as much as I can, there's other people there to help keep me accountable and say, your role is to do this. You know, and so as a father, as someone looking to be a lay leader in the church, all these things, community kind of helps guide your role, I guess, if that makes sense.
And the authenticity piece is like in your DNA. I mean, like you talked about at home, you saw your parents live it every day. With Charlie Judd, certainly you saw somebody living it every day. We tried really hard. You built a culture of living it every day. Good, bad, ugly, up, down, inside, out. It is what it is. What you see is what you get. Awesome, dude. So I end most every podcast, I've forgotten a few, by asking the question. You know, the name of the podcast is the Keep It Simple Podcast. So, Bryan, how do you keep things simple with all you've got going, being pulled on every different direction? How do you keep things simple in your own life?
Well, there was a song that my dad used to sing when we were kids, and there's a song that I sing. It's the same song I sing to my kids now. It's "Seek ye first the kingdom of God."
Oh yeah.
It's based off of Matthew 6, I think 33. Matthew 6. But it's "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." And so, you know, throughout life, there's all, like you said, there's all these pulls and tugs and all these different directions. And I want to do as much as I can. You know, I want to do all these things. But if I try to do all of them, I just end up being bad at all of them. You know, like if I try to it just ends up a mess. And so I found that if I focus on God's kingdom, on my faith and on my church, I'm better able to do the things that I'm supposed to do. And all the things that maybe tugging on me, they just kind of fade. It's like if I'm focused on the light, everything around it kind of fades out. And so just pretty much I put my faith first, and everything else will follow behind.
Amen. That's so cool. Just this week, I was talking to Connor today actually, but just this week I had this thought, you know, life is complicated, but faith doesn't have to be. And that's seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Hallelujah, hallelujah, right? That's the song, right? Yeah. Dude, thank you so much for carving off time. In just a moment, I'm going to hit stop recording. Don't hang up. I want to tell you bye formally. So many people, when I say bye and sign off of this thing, they're gone.
Exit out.
But thank you. I know you're busy raising a family, being a husband, all your training. You told me before you came on the air that if you got the whatever emergency alert, you may have to dip out and go do something with fire. Thank you. I'm there's going to be a lot of people that are really, really happy to see you and hear you and know that you are still among the living. You're kind of an enigma, right? You kind of live out there somewhere on the fringe. So thank you. I am so thankful I didn't choke you when you were 12. You give me incredible hope. You are, without question, one of my favorite people, dude.
Thank you.
And I'm so proud of you. I'm incredibly, incredibly proud of you. So thanks for carving off time, making time. I'm sure this will be soul food for so many people
I hope so.
that listen to it. So, all right.